This is a story from the land of Nod. Hi, my name is Annie and I create everything that you see and hear here at Land of Nod. If you would like to support the work that I do, please consider going to patreon.com/Land of Nod Learning. Thank you. Odysseus and the Trojan Horse. The Trojans and the Greeks had been at war for many years. King Priam of Troy was tired of all the fighting. He wanted peace. He sent his sons Hector and Paris across the sea to the great Greek city of Sparta so they could make a truce with King Menelaus. King Menelaus was happy to end the war, and he held a great banquet to honour the Trojan princes, Hector and Paris. But Paris fell in love with King Menelaus' wife, Helen of Sparta. Everyone thought that Helen was the most beautiful woman in the world, and so did Paris. When the Trojan princes left Sparta in their ships, Paris took Helen back to Troy. King Menelaus was furious with the Trojans. He gathered his armies together and, led by the mighty Odysseus, they set off after Paris and Hector. Outside the walled city of Troy, the Trojans still refused to give Helen back to the Greeks. "Let Helen of Sparta go," commanded the great Odysseus. "She is no longer Helen of Sparta," shouted Paris. "She is now Helen of Troy." Instead of having a huge battle, King Priam sent his two sons, Hector and Paris, to face the Greeks. Odysseus agreed that this was a better way to sort out the argument, so he chose his two best warriors to fight against the Trojan princes. First came Ajax, famous throughout Greece for his courage and his incredible strength. Together, he and Hector battled for most of one whole day. At first, the Greek Ajax looked as though he was winning, but Hector bravely fought on. Finally, Hector knocked Ajax to the ground. "I give in," cried Ajax. From the high walls of their city, the Trojans cheered their hero. They thought it was all over, but it wasn't. Achilles, the greatest warrior that had ever lived, had agreed to fight for the Greek king, Menelaus. He threw his spear and it landed right in Hector's leg. Now, all that stood between the Greek army and the city of Troy was Paris, Hector's younger brother. Now, Paris wasn't a great warrior, but he picked up his bow and fired arrows at Achilles as he charged towards him. Paris' first arrows bounced harmlessly off Achilles. "Ha ha! Is that your best shot?" laughed Achilles. The next arrow flew through the air and struck Achilles in the ankle. This was the one and only place on his body where the great warrior could be hurt. Achilles fell down dead at Paris' feet. Silence fell over the battlefield as everyone stared at the body of the fallen Achilles. No one thought he could actually ever be killed. Suddenly, Odysseus let out a deafening roar. "Charge!" he yelled. The Greek army tried their best to climb the walls and break down the gates of the Trojan city, but it was no use. The walls were too high and the gates were too strong. The Trojans fought them off every single time. Odysseus paused for a moment. "We must get into the city," he thought. "But how can we do it?" Then clever Odysseus had an idea. "Build me a great wooden horse," he ordered, "and make it big enough for me and my men to fit inside." No one really knew what Odysseus was up to, but for many days and many nights, the Greeks worked hard to build a huge wooden horse. When it was ready, Odysseus and his men crept inside. "Now we will trick the Trojans," he said. The Greek armies burnt their camps and pretended to get on their boats and sail back to Sparta, leaving only the wooden horse behind on the beach. When the Trojans saw the Greeks sailing away, they raced down onto the beach. They could hardly believe their eyes. "We've won! We've won!" they cheered. "The Greeks have gone! And look, they've left us a huge wooden horse. They've left us a gift." Together, the Trojans pushed the great horse up the beach and towards the gates of Troy. Inside, Odysseus and his men were keeping very quiet. "Don't make a sound," hushed Odysseus. He knew that if the Trojans heard them, their plan would fail and all would be lost. "Wait," cried one of the Trojan warriors. "What if the Greeks are trying to trick us?" He threw his spear into the belly of the wooden horse, just missing Odysseus and his men inside. Nothing happened. The Trojans laughed. "It is a gift," they cried. "Let's take it into the city and celebrate our victory over the Greeks." Some people weren't sure though. They thought the horse should be burnt to give thanks to the goddess Athena. But the others laughed at their fears and their silly ways. "Shh," said Odysseus to his men, still curled up inside the great horse. "Remember, don't make a sound." Finally, the horse was pushed and dragged into the city, and the gates of Troy were shut firmly behind it. That night, there was a great party. The whole of Troy celebrated the end of the long war. Everywhere the streets were full of people laughing and singing, feasting and dancing. Later, when everyone was finally asleep, Odysseus and his men crept out of the horse and onto the streets of the silent city. All the city's guards were snoring loudly after the party, and none of them heard Odysseus and his men tiptoeing past. Outside the city, under the cover of darkness, the Greek ships had returned to the bay, and the soldiers were waiting silently. Odysseus and his men unlocked the gates, and the Greek army charged in. The Trojans were shocked and caught unawares. They tried their best, but they were just too tired to fight and to stop Odysseus and the Greek army. Soon, the whole city was on fire, and people were running for their lives. By morning, all that remained of the great walled city of Troy was a pile of rubble. After the Trojan War, people forgot where the great city of Troy had stood. Even today, people aren't entirely sure. But no one will ever forget the story of the great wooden horse. Even nowadays, we still use the term Trojan horse to describe a trick. So the next time somebody gives you a gift, be very careful. It's not a Trojan horse. The end.